What's going on, everybody? And welcome back to the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. And thank you guys for tuning in to another video. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. You can see we got a little bit of orange. Well, we don't got a little bit of orange. We got our BC Lions shirt on today. So we're going to be back talking some BC Lions. We've been busy the last all summer, getting into the fall now with our coverage partnership with the British Columbia Football Conference of the Canadian Junior Football League, which has taken up quite a bit of our time this summer in a great way, I might add, as I have taken on a few other roles I did not see coming before the CFL season started. Was lucky enough to be the Vancouver Island Raiders home color commentator this season during 5 of their home games. The season was a ton of fun, and then to cover the conference as a whole was also a lot of fun. But unfortunately, that took me away from our BC Lions coverage this season. It took me away from also attending Lions games. So I wanted to get back because anybody that knows me, that knows the Canadian Football Fanatics, knows that Nathan Rourke is a big reason why, not only why we've started this platform, but we are big fans of one Nathan Rourke. So judging by the thumbnail, I'm sure you guys, and the title of today's video, I'm sure you guys could already tell what we are going to be talking about today, which is why Nathan Rourke deserves not only the most outstanding Canadian award, but the most outstanding player award in 2025 this year in the CFL. So before we do get into it, of course, folks, if you guys are following along on our social media platforms, if you guys could be a friend, tell a friend about what we got going on, not only on our Instagram platform, as we were doing quite well over there. You guys can find us on Instagram at Canadian Football Fanatics, but you guys can also follow along on Twitter, and we are over there at _CF Fanatics. Of course, if you guys are tuning in today and are enjoying all of our content that we have coming to you guys, please be sure to not only like today's video as it helps get this video into the algorithm. Comment down below, let us know who you guys think should be this year's MOP and MOC, and if you agree with me that it should be Nathan Rourke, or if you disagree, because as we are human beings, everyone has a right to their own opinion. So I'm not gonna, uh, I might razz you, I might give you a joke or two if you do disagree, but all in good fun if we're being honest, and all for good conversation and wanting to get the CFL conversation out there that much more. So we'd love to hear you guys' feedback. And of course, most importantly, if you guys are tuning into today's video on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. When you guys subscribe, hit the notification bell. You guys get notified every time we go live or upload a video like this one. And it's going to be a busy week on the channel. As I mentioned, we are back. We're going to be back for the playoff run for the BC Lions this fall. So as I mentioned, hit those notification buttons, but we will be back later this week. By the time you guys are hearing this, it should be going to try to get this uploaded today, right away, Sunday, October 26th. And then we'll be back later in the week as the BC Lions are going to be hosting the West semifinal November 1st, 2:30 kickoff from BC Place against the Calgary Stampeders. So we'll be back later in the week for a West semifinal preview, and we're going to be joined by the Hall of Famer, one Mark Steven, play-by-play man for the Calgary Stampeders, to break things down on this matchup. Of course, we'll give you our thoughts as well, and then we are hoping, crossing our fingers, hoping to maybe speak it into existence. We'll be at BC Place on Saturday if everything works out. So if everything works out, it is an early kickoff game. We should also have a post-game show for you guys from BC Place. Maybe we'll be able to have a guest or two live join us up from the press box. So other than that, I think that's all the reminders, everything that we need to get off our chest into the bulk of today's conversation. And we're not going to go for 30 minutes. Don't want to do a lot of maybe Canadian support, not necessarily everybody who, maybe casual fans more so than the diehard CFL fan that's tuning in on a weekly basis. Not only if their team is playing, but if their team's not playing, they're tuning into, with their Riders fans, BC Lions games, and so on and so forth, vice versa. So And as I mentioned, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. So if you do believe that, maybe Bo Levi Mitchell or, maybe a Justin Rankin, Dedrick Mills, whoever you may think should be in this conversation, that is there's no wrong answer per se. I might not just agree with you, although some of those names, I definitely agree they should be in the conversation. They've had great seasons. It's kind of like that LeBron James versus whatever you want to say, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan conversation. You can admit that two players are great just because you prop up one, say in this conversation, and Nathan Rourke, does not mean that I don't think a Bo Levi Mitchell isn't worthy, isn't deserving, and also isn't a first ballot Hall of Famer and great player, because I do believe so. It took me quite a bit of time to honestly come around to the fact that Nathan Rourke is this year's MOP, but I do believe so from start to finish. I know people maybe argue and kind of eyebrows raised to start to finish Cole. I think Bolivia Mitchell has been maybe a little bit more consistent. I would kind of maybe tend to disagree, especially if you do go back, look at some of those losses that were happening to the BC Lions that kind of, I think, overshadowed Nathan Rourke's season. Nathan Rourke and the offense are putting up 30 points a game. 25% of their drives are ending in touchdowns. So, I think the offense wasn't the problem in some of those early struggles this season. So let's get into the conversation now, and we're going to break it down into basically 5 steps. So, can I have it here in my notes? We're going to break it down to the numbers, which will be step number one, the moments. I think Nathan Rourke's had himself those MOP-calibre moments you kind of hear about in the NFL, those MVP type of moments, similar to an MOP type of moment. Then we're going to get into the supporting cast. We're going to get into the competition, and then we're going to get into the why or why not. So, as I mentioned, not going to stick around for too long as it is football Sunday. It's actually 9 a.m. Sunday morning. Wanted to get this out to you guys before my Buffalo Bills are back in action. Not too sure if you guys can see, but of course we got the hat on. We're ready to rock for 10 a.m. kickoff here, and hopefully the Bills are able to get back on track. But save that conversation for about an hour's time, because this is a football conversation related to the Great White North, that is the Canadian Football League, and this year's MOP. So let's get into it, as I do believe that Nathan Rourke does deserve this year's Most Outstanding Player award. And not only does he deserve that, I do believe he deserves to be awarded both Most Outstanding Player and Most Outstanding Canadian in the CFL in 2025. So, as I mentioned, let's get into step number one, which is kind of I guess, I don't want to say the lazy way of looking at things, or maybe the easy way, we should say, of looking at things, because it's obviously so accessible. It's also easier to kind of frame your narrative around things like the numbers or the stats. So that's why we're going to start with it first, and then try to get into more of the bigger conversation as we go on, add some context, add some nuance to that conversation that's in there. So let's start with it. And as we can look at last night's conclusion of the CFL's regular season, with the BC Lions defeating the Saskatchewan Roughriders, was a close one for a bit. The BC Lions able to pull it out and able to lock in that home playoff game, that number 2 seed. Yesterday, Nathan Rourke had himself, uh, you know, first half was quiet, but I think it kind of led into, not having the football a lot. They obviously score in the first possession, first play that they have, first play offensively from scrimmage, is what I'm trying to get out here, and look kind of come out like gangbusters in a sense. And it was a quiet first half outside of the first play there to Aiden Eberhard down the sideline. They're able to kind of flip the switch there in the second half, put together a um pretty good performance. We don't want to say pretty great. We don't want to go too crazy, but obviously Nathan Rourke was able to finish his regular season strong, 3 touchdowns, 300, and I want to say it was 50 or so plus yards passing. I kind of tweeted out that he put the exclamation point on his MOP season, solidifying the number 2 seed, getting enough wins. Because I think in this conversation, if we are being honest, folks, kind of what took me a long time as well, right, wrong, or otherwise, when having a discussion around major awards like this, team success matters. And as I mentioned, whether it's right or wrong, you have to have enough wins. You have to be in the top half of teams, and the BC Lions were able to do that, picking up their 11th win of the season, now finishing 11-7, which is crazy to think where they were what was it, 6 weeks ago, at sitting at 5-7, coming off that Ottawa loss, if I'm not mistaken. And times looked, if we're being honest, to peel back the curtain a little bit more for anybody that went back and were watching some of our post game shows, I stuck a fork right in the BC Lions season and thought after that point, there's no way they're able to overcome. Not only Nathan Rourke will be able to overcome this defense, but I didn't see them being able to turn it around defensively. So they're ultimately able to do so. But the numbers, let's get into the numbers before we get too scattered. Nathan Rourke was able to finish kind of what I was able to, what I was trying to lead towards the regular season ending. Nathan Rourke finishes with 5,290 pass yards, which is good enough for second in the CFL, 6 yards behind Bo Levi Mitchell. He also finishes with 31 passing touchdowns, which is second behind Bo Levi Mitchell. And then he was first in quarterback efficiency rating this season. I kind of, correlate that to, or kind of similar to kind of a QBR stat that is in the NFL. But he finished with the number one QB efficiency rating in the CFL with 112.2. You look at his numbers from a whole: 352 completions of 500 attempts for a completion percentage of 70.4. 16 interceptions, which is tied for the most in the CFL, and people are going to look towards that. And I think that's, as I mentioned, the lazy way or the easiest way to maybe try to tear down Nathan Rourke's argument for an MOP season. And as I said, I think that's a very lazy way to do so. Absolutely, you'd love to see Nathan Rourke, I don't know if cut that in half is maybe realistic, but even stick around, 10, 11 interceptions, I think it would be a tad bit better. And I think we saw a little bit more last year uh, to end the season. Obviously, when Nathan Rourke comes back from the NFL, you saw some of those interceptions that he had because, he finished the season obviously with more interceptions than touchdowns. And people are kind of freaking out. Is this the same Nathan Rourke, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Last year, he kind of got some bad bounces where, it hit the receivers in the hand, it would go up in the air, and it ends up an interception. That happened this year, but I kind of, off the top of my head, don't remember that happening more than, one or two times. For last year, it felt like it was happening way too often, and it was kind of just an anomaly of things to happen, and freak, flukish type of stuff. Where this year, yeah, the 16 interceptions are not pretty, but I think having some discussions with some guys that behind the scenes that have an understanding of Nathan Rourke's training, especially with training with QB motion, his quarterback coach understanding that they like to miss high more often than not, and that it's a better miss to them to miss high than low. I think some of those interceptions you saw with some overthrows and whatnot, so I think that's going to be able to be corrected in something like an off season and whatnot with Nathan Rourke once he gets back into the lab. So obviously, you don't like to see it, but I think something it's going to be able to be corrected. And obviously, when you look at the passing stats, and they are great with a lot of Nathan Rourke being in second and first in some of those categories. But you also got to peel back the curtain a little bit more, as I mentioned. Add that context when you look at Nathan Rourke finishing the season with 564 rush yards, good enough for eighth top 10. Not only just for quarterbacks, he's not eighth in rushing for quarterbacks, eighth in the entire CFL. That's including running backs in there as well, finishing with 564 rush yards. You look at 10 rushing touchdowns to go along with his 31 passing touchdowns to get him up to 41 total touchdowns on the season. That is obviously most in the CFL when combining that between quarterbacks, their touchdowns, passing and rushing. He also had for the 564 rush yards, he carried the ball 61 times, which is good enough for 9.2 yards per carry. Nathan Rourke basically picking up a first down every time he rushes the football phenomenally through the air and on the ground. And I think that's also what kind of just adds to that argument even more for me personally, that not only does Nathan Rourke do it through the air, which Bo Levi Mitchell did fantastic this year. You could add Nick Arbuckle into that conversation. Vernon Adams Jr. did it fantastically. Davis Alexander when he was healthy. Even Trevor Harris a little bit into that conversation as well. These guys don't do it as good enough or as great as Nathan Rourke does it on the ground. And I think that adds a huge, whatever you want to put into Nathan's hat, um, in terms of the argument for MOP this year. You also look at 12 of Nathan Rourke's 16 starts, as I know it says on the CFL website that 18 games played. He did dress, I believe, in the 18 games As you guys do remember, he was, I believe, listed as the third string quarterback in both those ones, as he missed the game after week 2 loss to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It might have been week 3, if I'm thinking back correctly, but he ends up obviously leaving the game versus Winnipeg, ends up being able to be available in an emergency situation capacity, but never ends up playing. Obviously, we see Jeremiah Masoli. We saw that's maybe another case in point, another quarterback in this offense and what it looks like. Nathan Rourke only playing 16 games this season, still being able to do what he did is remarkable, missing those 2 games. So 12 of his 16 starts, 300 yards passing. That kind of puts a somewhat bow, I guess you could say, on the numbers. I guess a little bit more you could add, as I said, with the touchdown drives this season. Of the touchdown drives, BC was able to result those touchdown drives 25% of the time into scoring touchdown drives, which is also remarkable. It was far and away the best in the CFL. Nobody was even in the 20s as far as percentages wise. You look at 11 of the 18 games this season, obviously, it would be 11 of the 16 games Nathan started in. They were able to score 13. No offense to Jeremiah Masoli, but obviously they did not score 30 with Jeremiah Masoli in the lineup as a starting quarterback. So that kind of puts a bow on the numbers side of things for the argument. Now I'm going to go to the moments, and let's start from most recency and work our way backwards. Obviously, we have to start with the 70-yard touchdown. And not only is it a unbelievable play for Nathan Rourke, and without a doubt a Player of the Year candidate for the CFL this season. How many quarterbacks in the world lacing up pads, strapping up a helmet, make that play? And obviously, I'm going to get the lazy commenters of, well, Lamar Jackson does that, or Kyler Murray does that, or obviously Josh Allen. I got to throw in there, obviously, with Josh Allen being able to, I believe his career has 50 yards, but that's another conversation for another day. We're talking about the BC Lions and Nathan Rourke. Um, I'm asking that because that right there shows you the class that Nathan Rourke's in, of how talented, how athletic of a quarterback he is, how much of a dual threat he is, not only passing the ball. I think a lot of people overrate him or overlook him as a runner. 70 yards on the ground where it came from a broken play, kind of looked like it was a zone read to the side that Nathan ends up rushing to. He ends up pulling it. It kind of looks like he wants to go to the backside of where the play was supposed to go. He ends up kind of realizing, oh, not there. He cuts it back across formation, finds a seam. He ends up hitting that seam at full speed and ends up pulling away from everybody. As Dustin Nielsen mentioned on the call, there's guys like Terrell Ford, other DBs that are very well known for how fast they are in the CFL, and he's pulling away from them. They're not able to even catch up. So that's moment number 1 for me. Nathan Rourke pulling away for a 70-yard touchdown that puts him into a class of 4 or 5 guys in the world that are able to maybe pull that off, and that's a maybe. So next one, obviously we got to go to we'll work our way back. I believe this was the one that happened first, but for me, the first down against the Toronto Argonauts at home, where you're trying to ice the game, you come out to get this lead versus the Toronto Argonauts. In previous weeks, you already saw the what was it, the 52-34 loss that was in Toronto. You get the Argos back in your building. You have a good start. You kind of put your foot on their neck, if you will, and kind of in a sense, kind of, get a little bit of payback. They start to claw back, and it starts to look like, oh man, are the BC Lions going to fumble this one away and kind of in Lions fashion lose a game that they should have won, should have been on the other outcome of. And it starts to get close late in that football game. The Lions end up getting possession of the ball late in the game to try to ice it away. I want to say it was a 22-27 BC Lions lead late in the game. They end up getting into a second and short situation. Quarterback sneak is coming. All 12 players on offense know it's coming. All 12 players on defense know it's coming, including Wynton McManus, all-star CFL linebacker. You could argue best linebacker in the CFL. I know I've argued that on our weekly shows in previous years. For my money, I think Wynton McManus at his best, at his healthiest, is the best middle linebacker in the CFL. He meets Nathan Rourke in the backfield or near the line of scrimmage to the left side of the BC Lions offensive line. Nathan Rourke meets him head on. Initially, it looks like a stalemate that Wynton McManus is going to win because he's going to be able to drive him back from that first down, and wasn't necessarily a 2nd and 1 situation. It kind of looked more like a 2nd and 1.5, second and maybe even a 2. Wasn't a gimme by any means. And Nathan Rourke ends up kind of shrugging slash spinning off Wynton McManus and being able to fall forward for about 3 or 4 yards and picking up the first down to ice the game for the BC Lions. And that was moment maybe number 1 at the time, but ultimately number 2 for our timeline in terms of MOP-calibre moments. Nathan Rourke refusing to lose and saying, you know what? No, it's not going to happen in the hole. I'm making sure I'm falling forward for this first down to give my team the victory. Next, I would say, is the matchup head-to-head versus Vernon Adams Jr. and the Calgary Stampeders. Now, obviously, it's not a 1 versus 1. This is the greatest team game in the world in terms of football. But all the hype, all the anticipation going to that one, all the conversation going to that one as well, with even the weekly show, right? Guys like Coach Phil, guys like Shane, and shout out to both those fellas, rightfully so, asking that conversation in a weekly show. But they kind of asked, mid-season, did the BC Lions make the right move? Did moving on from Vernon Adams Jr., did they pick the right quarterback? And kind of at the time, obviously looking kind of like the homer, because at the time the BC Lions are struggling. It looks like they're going to miss the playoffs. It looks like Vernon Jr. is going to arguably be in the MOP conversation, and the Calgary Stampeders are going to have a home playoff game. So it looks crazy different than what I was saying when I was at the time. But I believed in Nathan Rourke. I clearly think that he's the better quarterback long term, and that's not a shot at Vernon Jr. by any means. But head-to-head matchup, Nathan Rourke absolutely dominated that one, especially the first half. The touchdown run, I believe, from about 20 yards out, where he's making multiple defenders miss. He ends up picking up a massive touchdown that kind of put the exclamation point on that first half. I believe it was 28-7 or something like that going into halftime, where Nathan Rourke said, "You know what? Drop the mic. I am the best player in the CFL, and I was the best player in that deal." And the BC Lions did make the best move for the franchise. So let's get into the supporting cast, as we're kind of getting into a little bit late here. Probably going to get into a 35-minute conversation, but that was probably to be expected. So the supporting cast, and I think let's get into that a little bit, because it's an important conversation to have, because I think preseason. Let's get into the receivers first. The narrative around the receivers has completely shifted, in my opinion, dating back to preseason. As I mentioned, with the weekly shows we've done, I'm getting the questions asked, and rightfully so, right? Where does this receiving core rank realistically? Obviously, it's a different conversation now at the end of the season when you look at and have 4 receivers basically over 700 yards receiving. I know Javon Catoy basically just finished under that with, I think, like 680 yards, but you have Keelan Hatcher leading the CFL in receiving yards with 1,600. Justin McKinnis at 1,200, just I think in third place. Aiden Eberhardt, just under 1,000 yards. And then, as I mentioned, um, Javon Catoy, just under 7 yards, just under 700 yards. And I want to say Stanley Berryhill was in there somewhere as well. The narrative around the receiving core going into the season was that this was arguably one of the worst, one of the, you know, kind of, I wouldn't even say top heavy, but they had the most questions around them of, can Justin McKinnis do it again? Can Keelan Hatcher at age 31, coming off a torn Achilles, get back to his all CFL form? He obviously does so, and then some. Javon Catoy, I think, has been looked at as quite the underrated Swiss Army knife blocking receiver. I think there's a ton more for Javon Catoy. Unfortunately for him, there's so many mouths to feed. There's only one ball to go around, so he's kind of still looking for that 1,000-yard season as a receiver. I believe that that ceiling for him is definitely capable. You look at a guy like Aiden Eberhardt this year, a guy that's maybe looked upon as kind of that receiver 4 or 5. I think it's clearly shown he can be a very reliable receiver 3, or and maybe even higher into the lineup. A very reliable guy with very strong hands, and a guy like Stanley Berryhill is very loved in that locker room. A very much a glue guy, has stepped up at almost every turn this year, and he had a very hot start to the season. Kind of fizzled out somewhat, but has turned out to be quite the deep threat for the BC Lions this season. And I think he's only going to grow not only with his chemistry with Nathan Rourke, but as a player individually in the CFL. So that's you got to start there with the receiver conversation. You look at the offensive line, and obviously the offensive line has done, I think, a good job this year. I don't want to go as far to say a great job this year, but you look at, obviously least sacks given up in the CFL this season with 18. I think to add to the Rourke conversation a little bit more, and not to take too much away from the offensive line because I don't want to do so. I understand how hard that position is. I understand that football is the greatest team game, as I mentioned, and Nathan Rourke isn't able to do the things that he has done this season without that offensive line. But I would also argue, and I think the offensive line would argue for their quarterback in this conversation of, Nathan Rourke also helps out that offensive line a ton in terms of his release time, his processing skills, getting the ball out before the rush is able to get to him, understanding what defense is in. As I mentioned, the processing side of things, understanding what defense is in before, pre-snap and stuff like that to have an idea where he's going to go. He's holding the ball, one less second because he's so much prepared pre-snap, stuff like that. So I think that does also come into play when talking about the offensive line because, you know, to be honest, for a second here, I think that still has to be a conversation to be had maybe in the offseason. Obviously, you look at a guy like Dejon Allen, who was the big kind of trade target, and the BC Lions were able to win that sweepstakes in the offseason. He obviously goes down to injury, and we weren't able to see him in the lineup for a majority of the year. And he's not to blame. When he's been in the lineup, Dejon Allen has been fantastic. Jarrell Broxton, shout out to Jarrell Broxton because he definitely needs to be in the most outstanding offensive lineman conversation. I really hope that he is the West Division representative because he's had a phenomenal season once again, and definitely doesn't get the credit that he deserves as a offensive lineman because he's been locked down once again, especially at the left tackle position. He does his job on a weekly basis and deserves the credit. But outside of the tackle positions, I think there's a lot of questions still to be had. Even a guy like George Una, who they've kind of trusted and looked at this season as their young draft pick. I think I'm not entirely sold on him. Corey Woodruff, I think, has had himself a solid season. And Mike Couture, I think I've had that conversation quite a bit. People know, I think, how I feel and would love to, maybe look internally or even look towards trying to upgrade that position at some point this offseason. So, and then obviously can't forget about James Butler. I think that probably goes against a guy like Nathan Rourke in this argument because James Butler has taken, similar to how Nathan Rourke has helped out and taken a ton of pressure off that offensive line. James Butler has taken a ton of pressure and yes, it just took a ton of pressure off of Nathan Rourke this season when it comes to not only rushing the ball, being over 1,100 yards rushing the football, passing the ball out of the backfield, being a very, very reliable guy with his hands, coming into the backfield, catching the ball, picking up first downs as a receiver as well. You think about the catch versus Hamilton. Obviously, and that's the JB revenge game going back into Hamilton after last season. He was able to catch that. I believe was it a wheel route or corner route? I believe in the right side of the end zone. He's obviously that was I believe it was a game winner versus Hamilton that week. So let's get into the competition quickly, and then we'll get into the why, and let's get out of here for a 35-minute conversation. When we get the conversation, I think this is to me a two-horse race. And I know a lot of people, especially the fellows that I do the weekly show with, Shane and Coach, try to get on me, and rightfully so. I love that those guys do it. I think in a year like this, though, it's just it's trying to pull at stuff that really isn't there, in my opinion, when talking about other positions that should be in the conversation. And I will say one guy, definitely, maybe even two guys, deserve to be in the conversation outside of the quarterback position. But to me, a guy like Davis Alexander, yes, has had a phenomenal season, hasn't been healthy enough to be in that conversation. Yes, Trevor Harris has the Riders in the first place in the Western Division, hasn't had a good enough season yet to be in the conversation for me as a quarterback. You look at the other guys, maybe a defensive guy. Obviously, you have a most outstanding defensive player award for that player, but you look at maybe a Thurman, Jameer Thurman out of Saskatchewan. He's had a good season. I think a phenomenal season from a defensive standpoint. I don't think it's realistic for him to be in the MOP conversation. You look at a guy like Cam Judge, Toronto's record, as I mentioned, with team success coming into play. I don't believe he's in that conversation. You look at a guy like maybe Stavros Castellanos. I don't think just based off, maybe some of the interceptions. He has had a phenomenal season as well from, other aspects, tackling, forced fumbles, stuff like that. AG, I think should maybe be Adrian Green should probably be in the most outstanding defensive player conversation. Obviously, a guy like Matthew Betts, most outstanding defensive player. I think the defensive side of things, it's kind of tough to even group any of those guys into the conversation for me because they've had phenomenal seasons from that standpoint, but just I don't think MOP-calibre seasons. Even when you look at a guy like Solomon Elamimi and Roland Milligan, what they had to do to be in that conversation and to win it, I think is nobody's kind of been in that caliber this season. For me, I think the other two guys that should be in the conversation outside of a Bo Levi Mitchell, starting with maybe a Dietrich Mills, obviously rushing leader this season, been a huge reason why the Calgary Stampeders have been the Calgary Stampeders this season. But I think the arguments against him on his own team, even let alone when you look how strong that defense has been this season, other guys along that, Hutchinson maybe being in that conversation, Adrian Green, as I mentioned, and then on the offensive side of the ball through 10, 12 weeks, Vernon Adams Jr. was kind of in that conversation and one of the front runners. So other guy would be Justin Rankin. Shout out to Justin Rankin. I think he had a phenomenal season, kind of dragging the Edmonton Elks back into relevancy and into the playoff opportunity. Ultimately, they fall short and they finish in the basement of the Western Division once again. And hopefully they're able to turn the corner in 2026. But hopefully, as been said, year after year after year, and it's kind of the same old for the Edmonton Elks. So as I mentioned, I think this is kind of a two-horse race between Bo Levi Mitchell and Nathan Rourke. I wouldn't necessarily be mad if Bo Levi Mitchell won because I understand from a start to finish standpoint, you could definitely argue that Bo Levi Mitchell has been more consistent, or at least his team has, I think is probably the right argument. But for me, it's Nathan Rourke for MOP or bust. Let's get into the why, and then let's call this a conversation as we are getting to 32 minutes. So why should Nathan Rourke be the MOP of the CFL in 2025? For me, at his best, Nathan Rourke's the best player in the CFL. And absolutely, I'm wearing BC Lions colors. You can call me biased, whatever you want to say. But when you look at it, there's a reason why after 10 games he got an NFL opportunity. This guy is remarkable. I believe Dustin Nielsen has coined him or nicknamed him Remarkable Rourke anytime he makes some of these fantastic plays. As I said, for me, there's not a guy that's playing any better in the CFL than Nathan Rourke. And I think case in point, as I mentioned, prior to kind of him, and not even him, the team turning around things, because you got to definitely give credit to their defense with additions like Adai and the other fellow around along the defensive line, being able to kind of kickstart Matthew Betts in this last 5-game win streak, 6-game win streak, whatever it's been to end the regular season. It's been a total team effort, but Nathan Rourke has been at the forefront, has been most definitely the tip of the spear. I do not believe that there's a better player in the CFL. Not only from for a right now perspective, I think looking forward, Nathan Rourke is not going anywhere. Nathan Rourke is only getting better, I believe. Nathan Rourke is going to have multiple 5,000-yard seasons with 10 rushing touchdowns and 30 plus passing touchdowns, and I believe multiple of them. This is only the beginning, folks, which is crazy to think about. He's breaking all these records, and not only Canadian records. He's breaking multiple CFL records. He's doing things that nobody's seen in years, decades. And there's still it's crazy to me that there's still haters, especially Canadians and I get it from a fan perspective. You're a fan. We're the Canadian Football Fanatics. And the definition of a fanatic is a diehard fan, essentially, right? And I get it that maybe you don't want to see your team go against a guy like Nathan Rourke. And it's easier for me to say and sit here and say that, with BC Lions colors on and fandom on, how can you not root for a guy like Nathan Rourke? But for me, anybody that's a CFL fan usually tends to, tune in throughout the week, and maybe they're tuning in, whether teams, say Montreal, they're tuning into a Lions game regardless on a Friday night. And it's crazy to me that there's fans out there that don't tune in and don't be like, wow, this guy is phenomenal at what he does. And he is up there for, one of the better players. As I said, people are most definitely right to their opinion, and they can have their opinion on who's, the best player, because I think that could change on any given week. But I think, you know, guys like Brady Oliveira, right, where because they've had such phenomenal starts to their career, when they have, down years, and Brady Oliveira's down year, 1,200 yards rushing, and then obviously the 3 touchdowns isn't great, but his down years, Aaron Rodgers, I think, had the quote of, "My down years look like people's, career years." So Nathan Rourke, I think, is kind of in that conversation now where if he isn't having a phenomenal week after week and week, excuse me, let me say that again. If Nathan Rourke isn't phenomenal week after week, people are up in arms of, "Oh, see, I tried to tell you so," or so quick to try to tear this guy down. But for me, I think it kind of starts with, and obviously it's the most outstanding player. Not only is Nathan Rourke the most outstanding player, but I think to kind of lean into the NFL conversation a little bit more, obviously they call it the most valuable player. Nathan Rourke is far and away the most valuable player in the CFL, and I don't think it's really even close. And I do believe that wholeheartedly in that conversation. As I said, I think there's a ton of outstanding players, but when it comes to most valuable, you look at a guy like, in this conversation, more valuable than Bo Levi Mitchell. I think without a doubt more valuable than Bo Levi Mitchell. And that's not to take anything away from Bo Levi Mitchell, but I think in the conversation, you could argue Kenny Lawler's maybe even more valuable to that Hamilton Tiger Cats team, because what would that Tiger Cats team look without a Kenny Lawler? Keon Hatcher, you can maybe argue, or for anybody that's trying to argue, well, cool, Keon Hatcher's had a better year than Kenny Lawler. Keon Hatcher's 31 years old, coming off a torn Achilles, and Nathan Rourke's turning back the clock, turning him back into his prime. And I don't think you can argue that Keon Hatcher is in that conversation of most valuable, most outstanding, because there's other guys in his receiving core. I think, obviously you have the Keandre Smiths and other guys in that receiving core for Hamilton that you could argue as well. But I just don't believe that there's anybody more valuable in the CFL than Nathan Rourke. Obviously, it's not the most valuable player. I just don't think that anybody depends on one player more than the BC Lions. In case in point, when we saw Jeremiah Masoli under center for 2 weeks, because it was very tough sledding. It was hard to watch. No offense to Jeremiah Masoli, great career, but I think Jeremiah Masoli kind of stuck around for 1 year too long. And also into this conversation of why, to add off that, of obviously I mentioned that, excuse me, let me kind of backtrack a little bit. When talking about most valuable, can you put any other quarterback, a Vernon Adams Jr., a Bo Levi Mitchell on BC, and could they have the same success? I don't believe so. And obviously, it's not as I said, football is the greatest team sport in the world, and it's not a one-man award. As I said before, it has a lot to do with team success, et cetera, et cetera. But I would be curious to see if you could put any other quarterback on BC and they'd have the same success. Davis Alexander, case in point, even at him, because of his phenomenal start to his career. People are very high on him, not only in Montreal, but I think even myself watching Davis Alexander play. I am very excited to see kind of his future, his career start to blossom as they go on and stay healthy, because that hopefully that is kind of the number one thing, because that guy is reckless, man. The way he runs and the way he he's very fearless in the pocket, but he is reckless also at times. But for me, don't want to stick around too much longer, folks. I believe Nathan Rourke is the not only best player in the CFL, I believe he is the most outstanding Canadian and most outstanding player in 2025 in the CFL, and rightfully deserves those awards this season. Obviously, I do not have a vote, so we will see what happens. And as I said, there's maybe not necessarily a wrong answer in Bo Levi Mitchell, but that's kind of, for me, anyways. If it's not Bo Levi Mitchell, it better be Nathan Rourke, because I don't believe anybody else is deserving. So as I mentioned, we are going to be back, folks, for the playoff run. As long as the BC Lions keep winning, we will be here along the way. We're going to be back with a West semifinal preview with the Hall of Famer Mark Steven later in the week. And then we'll be back for a post-game show after the West semifinal. Hopefully it is a victory, because we don't want to be one and done here on the channel. Hopefully, if that is the case, that means we were bad luck and maybe we shouldn't have come back. But that being said, it's a great time of year. Lastly, want to remind anybody that is tuning in to check out all of our BCFC coverage and CJFL coverage as well, because that is not going to stop with the Okanagan Sun. Congratulations to them punching their ticket to their second straight Canadian Bowl. Getting their revenge over the St. Clair Saints last week was phenomenal to watch. It's been phenomenal to cover all season, as the Okanagan Sun We're the Cullen Cup champions for the BCFC conference champions, essentially, and then now going to be playing for the national championship in the CJFL. Would highly encourage you guys to check out some of that coverage. Would highly encourage you guys. It's going to be tough on Saturday with the BC Lions playing. Curious to see what time the Canadian Bowl is going to be on Saturday. Would just highly encourage you guys to check it out. As I mentioned, though, if you guys are enjoying all of our content here on the channel, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe. When you guys subscribe, press the notification bell. You guys get notified every time we go live or upload a video like this one right here. And of course, you guys can follow us on our social media platforms at Canadian Football Fanatics on Twitter, and we're at Canadian Football Fanatics on we're at Canadian Football Fanatics on Instagram, at _CF Fanatics on Twitter. Other than that, folks, Nathan Rourke for MOP, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.